Coming up on British Thought Leaders, I sit down with David Matass, an international human rights lawyer and world-leading researcher of forced organ harvesting. David says the killing of prisoners of conscience for their organs is ongoing in China today.
They're continuing to advertise transplant tourism. So, and the institutions are still functioning. I mean, they haven't closed down these transplant hospitals.
And the genocide is happening in China, not only against the Uyghurs, but also against the Falun Gong spiritual practice.
We called it a cold genocide in the sense that it's not happening all at once. It's happening slowly over time. That's why the term cold is used. You don't have this kind of picture of genocide the way you do with hot genocides, but I would say definitely, even though it's a slower moving genocide, it's a genocide all the same. They actually produced a documentary through Phoenix TV in Mandarin in Hong Kong where they tried to rebut our report, but in such a strange way that it really affirmed what we were saying. They interviewed one of the doctors that our investigators called Lu Guoping and presented him with a transcript of the conversation we recorded and asked him, "Did you get the skull?" And he said, "Yes." Asked him, "Did you say these things?" He said, "Yes." Except for all the stuff about Falun Gong. That I didn't say. And so they're accusing me of, and David Kilgore, of just fiddling with the transcript. Mm. They don't acknowledge that there's a recording, and they don't explain how we seamlessly could have interwoven in his own voice what he denies having said and what he admits having said.
批发价，比如说，就说你们以前用的，就说是从哪里找？是看守所还是到这个监狱呢？
监狱里面找的。
哦，监狱里啊，他那种就是都是那种健康的法轮功是吧？健康的法轮功。
对，肯定是选好的才能做完，因为这种东西做了要保证质量。
I mean, it's just such an implausible explanation that they're really. I mean, they're so used to people agreeing with them that they don't even think through what a proper answer would be to someone who disagrees with them. This sort of material is generated for people who don't have access to an opposing point of view. Mm. It's not really designed to convince anyone. And the fact that they couldn't even think of a good answer to the evidence that I produced, not even as good an answer as I could think to the evidence that I produced, led me to think that really this must be happening. I mean, their very denials was a further evidentiary trail in favor of the conclusion that this was happening.
So that documentary was pretty much their only rebuttal that they gave?
Well, no, they would make statements. Like, you know, there was another interesting incident, which is equally foolish, I would say. Jay Levy, who's a doctor in Israel, asked me to speak at his hospital, Bellinson Hospital in Israel near Tel Aviv, about this issue. The government of China heard about it. They called up the foreign ministry of the government of Israel asking them to cancel the event, and the foreign ministry passed it on to the hospital. Hospital said no. They then asked, the Chinese embassy asked the foreign ministry to ask the hospital to disinvite me. The foreign ministry passed it on to the hospital. Hospital said no. The Chinese embassy then asked the foreign ministry to ask the hospital to disinvite the foreign Falun Gong practitioner who was on the panel and instead invite a member of the Chinese embassy. And to that, the foreign ministry passed that on to the hospital, and to that the hospital said yes. So I'm on this panel without the Falun Gong practitioner and with a representative of the embassy. Time and time again, I see them saying something, but it's just nonsense. And so, I mean, if that's all you can say an answer is nonsense, it means you don't have an answer. It means it must be real.
What reaction have you had from the international medical community, particularly transplant surgeons who hear what their colleagues in China are doing?
Well, I would say it's been split. I would say that there's some transplant surgeons who are under the illusion that they can wean China away from transplant abuse by contact, negotiation, just friendly conversations. There's others that realize, I would say, that that's not going to work, that all you're going to do when you do that is get them to say what, they'll say what you want them to say, and they'll just walk away and carry on doing what they're doing. And so there is, I would say, a split within the profession. JLB, I mentioned, who's very keen on addressing the issue, has done some research on the issue, has written some articles on the issue, and he's involved in the Heart and Lung Transplantation Society, which has basically said they're not going to publish any transplant research from China or allow speakers to come to their meetings and so on. I mean, that's heart and lung, but the rest of the profession is not like that. The Canadian Society of Nephrology and the Canadian Society of Transplantation have produced a good ethical statement, basically. For transplant tourists, don't give them prescriptions, don't give them medical records, warn them, and in some countries, they don't specifically mention China, but in some countries, if you go abroad, somebody may be killed for their organs, so it's much more a sophisticated ethical statement than in many other countries. But I would say there's other transplantation professionals who, I mean, some of them are just not engaged. They just don't get involved in the issues. But others are basically prepared to negotiate, accommodate, visit, invite, and have discussions about the issue as if that's going to change things. Mm.